Should Asia be celebrating or seriously worrying? After launching a trade war with China, Donald Trump now declaring a deal's at hand for a one-year truce with nothing yet signed. We'll ask about the South Korea sit-down between the U.S. president and Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, promises of reduced tariffs and computer chip exports by the U.S., the easing of restrictions on rare earth minerals, and a return to soybean imports by Beijing. Also, the choreography of a shorter than expected hour and 40-minute meeting in South Korea, followed by Trump's decision to skip the regional APEC summit that follows. The U.S. president to instead return to the White House. Next on his schedule, a Halloween trick-or-treat ceremony. More broadly, will the United States remain committed to Asian allies, what with its troops permanently stationed in Japan and South Korea, its historic support for Taiwan and the Philippines? Is that compatible with the hard-to-read great power bargaining that we're examining? Today in the France 24 debate, a truce on whose terms? Joining us, Léonie Allard, visiting fellow at the Atlantic Council think tank. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
From Chicago, Nancy Kian, professor of economics at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management, a founder of the China Econ Lab. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
From Ajaccio on the beautiful island of Corsica, André Lozekrug-Pietri, Chair and Scientific Director for the Joint European Disruption Initiative. Welcome back to the show.
Good evening, François.
And from Brussels, Elvire Fabry, Senior Research Fellow at the Jacques Delors Institute think tank. Good to see you.
Good evening.
A reminder, you can always listen to the show. That's right, wherever podcasts are streamed. You can also like and subscribe. First off, before we dive into what happened in Busan, let's ask about the timeline of the day. Just minutes before Donald Trump's meeting there with Xi Jinping, the U.S. president posting to Truth Social that Washington would soon be testing its first nuclear weapon since 1992. Afterwards, on his return to the U.S. aboard Air Force One, Trump insisting it wasn't specifically directed at China.
It had to do with others. They seem to all be nuclear testing. Russia? We have more nuclear weapons than anybody. We don't do testing. You know, we've halted it many years ago. But with others doing testing, I think it's appropriate that we do also.
Léonie Allard, what's that about?
So it's very new that an American administration would talk about resuming testing. There hasn't been any testing in the US since 1992, as you mentioned. It's still unclear what it means exactly, whether it means actual nuclear explosive testing, as some experts are reading into. And if that's the case, in the tweet he mentions the Department of War, but it's the NNSA, the safety agency, that does the testing so that a civilian authority oversees the testing. So it's still very unclear as to what exactly
So there's three hypotheses here. He's either mad at Russia, mad at Russia and China, or he just wants to grab headlines.
So I think there's an element of course, willingness in a very usual, Trumpian way of doing diplomacy, of creating leverage, of these big statements. He's been talking a lot about nuclear disarmament. It's something that he's mentioned over the course of the past month. And you see that over the past years, especially with the Russian war in Ukraine, you've had a crumbling of the arms control architecture that exists since the end of the Cold War. So that's mainly between the US and Russia. And now you also have, so that is crumbling. And on top of that, you have China that's significantly increased its number of warhead and delivery systems, almost doubled them in the past 5 years, according to some open source research. So this type of statement by Donald Trump, which again, we don't really know exactly what will happen in reality and how it will be transcribed, it still has to be put in the context of his willingness to engage in disarmament talks with Russia, on the one hand, also pursuing new types of weapons and modernizing its arsenal, and China increasing its arsenal on the other hand.
Okay, Andrei Lizakupkachi, let me play devil's advocate here. Is this just keeping other nuclear powers that are rivals on their toes? Is it a good thing if Donald Trump's talking about nuclear testing?
Well, it's surprising, and I think we should maybe not overread that as a change in the nuclear posture of the U.S. Most of the major powers have achieved today simulation that actually replaced the need to do aerial or underground nuclear testing. It's true that in order to assert that their arsenal is still a deterrent, very regularly tests are being made, missiles are shot. That's what France does regularly in order to show that they are able to deploy effectively such a deterrence. So I think that's probably what we may see in the next weeks or months to come. It's not necessarily what we saw in the 50s and the 60s, where basically the nuclear powers were trying out and testing their first A or H bomb. I think we are in a typical, tit for tat. There needed to be a reaction from Donald Trump to what Vladimir Putin announced with his submarine nuclear drone called the Poseidon. So he needed to announce something on that. I would not overstate that currently, but time will tell.
All right, overstated, we will not. But for now, about that 100-minute meeting that took place in Busan. Again, it was between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. Charlie James has more.
It's a great pleasure.
After months of escalation, signs of cooling tensions between the world's two top economies. U.S. President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping left their trade talks in South Korea Thursday without a major breakthrough, but a basic consensus. Both leaders got concessions that will help them domestically. China says it will make it easier for the U.S. to buy rare earth minerals, crucial for American car manufacturing, electronics, and military weapons. China has a near monopoly on rare earths production and processing, making these materials a key bargaining chip for China globally.
All of the rare earth has been settled, and that's for the world. I mean, worldwide. That roadblock is gone now. There's no roadblock at all.
Meanwhile, the U.S. said it will look into suspending export controls on powerful AI chips made by U.S. companies like NVIDIA. The U.S. has restricted the sale of high-end chips to China, citing national security concerns.
And they're going to be discussing that with NVIDIA to see whether or not they can do. I said that's really between you and NVIDIA, but we're sort of the arbitrator or the referee.
Trump also says tariffs on China enacted in response to the flow of chemical ingredients for fentanyl into the U.S. have been reduced from 20% to 10%, and that in response, China will start buying massive amounts of soybeans. While Trump called the meeting a 12 out of 10, President Xi has been less forthcoming. The nation's foreign ministry says that while a consensus was reached on resolving these issues, there is still work to be done.
Both teams are expected to promptly detail and finalize follow-up work to ensure that the consensus is properly maintained and implemented.
Trump says a full U.S.-China trade deal will be signed pretty soon and that he will visit China in April. But crucially, there are no signatures on paper yet, leaving the door open for these two world powers to change their minds.
Nancy Kiang, do you agree with Donald Trump? Was that meeting a 12 out of 10?
I think if there's one thing we learned from this meeting, it's that Americans are into great inflation and the Chinese don't like great inflation. So, I think this meeting, it's good. This is a good meeting, right? So the U.S. and China has been escalating their tensions for years, since Trump won. And at this point, all of the policy tools in the toolbox have been put into play. So both countries desperately needed some breathing space. So, at this point, the tariff numbers were so high that we've all lost track of them. We don't even know what they are. I don't know what they are. You don't know what they are. And do they even have any meaning once we're in 3-digit tariff numbers? And the same thing with what China was imposing last week or 2 weeks ago, saying that it was going to restrict rare earth exports on essentially most magnets that would affect consumer electronic as well as defense sectors. Right, they've kind of gotten to a point where either they just have to decouple or they have to pull back. And I think what we're seeing from this meeting is that they're both willing to pull back. They're talking, they're not fighting. So that has to be a good sign.
Help us sort of decrypt what we heard from the Chinese side. Much more understated, as we saw in that report after the meeting. There were some conciliatory noises for the cameras going into it. Let's take a listen to China's president.
Given our different national conditions, we do not always see eye to eye with each other. And it is normal for the two leading economies of the world to have frictions now and then.
Now, Nancy Kiang, is this the usual niceties?
I would say so. I would say that China's being polite and sincere. It's saying that we're big, you're big, we can hurt each other, we can disagree, but in the end, we need each other if we're going to prosper, right? We don't need each other to survive. These are very big, diverse economies and big geopolitical powers. But these days, I think what China is saying is we want to do a bit more than survive. We can't go back to 20 years ago or even 15 years ago, but we don't need to fight. We don't need to have conflict. We can talk. Let's talk.
All right. You agree with that, Elvire Favry? Both sides toning it down, or did Xi Jinping get the better of Donald Trump?
I think Xi Jinping was in the better position because if you look at the decisions that were announced, it seems that we are going back to to January, to the beginning of Trump too. One thing is concerns the imports of soybeans and more U.S. agriculture product in China. That was the situation by the end of the Biden presidency, and then China stopped importing those agriculture products. So it is now engaged in importing again. If we take the second point related to critical minerals and notably rare earth, so the decision is to agree only for a very short period of 1 year that exports would continue to reach the U.S. markets and the rest of the world. This is a good news for us, but it's only a normalization of the situation. There's no breakthrough in the relation, and what it shows is that China adopting a very strong, resilient strategy and showing that it was ready to endure the costs of a very costful defensive strategy, raising potentially very huge tariffs on U.S. imports, has succeeded to push back the U.S. aggressive measures. So I would say that it's a sort of armed truce, temporary truce in an escalation that is slowly structuring, because on both sides they're taking measures to decouple the technological supply chain. Of course, notably the defense industry in the U.S. needs to have access to preserve the access to the Chinese rare earth refined goods components. And on the other side, the Chinese still need to have access to some U.S. semiconductors. But very quickly, the Chinese are increasing their innovation capacity. They already have shown that they're very good in producing some innovative chips for Huawei. And it will be very challenging for the US as for the rest of the world to reduce dependency on the Chinese rare earth refining capacity. Once again, it's not only about extracting those rare earths, which are not very rare. We can find them in many regions throughout the world. But the challenge is rather to refine them because they need to be very pure. And China has even already imposed some license for exports of technologies for the refining of those rare earths. So this will remain very challenging. And 1 year period to commit for those exports is not a guarantee for the evolution of the bilateral relation.
Yeah, 1 year is indeed a short period of time. I want to get back to this issue of the rare earths with you, Elvire, in a moment. But first, let's look at some of the reactions. The markets are cautious after the meeting. After all, it hasn't been signed yet, this deal. Some in the press quite damning. The New York Times posted an article headline, "The Art of Letting Trump Claim a Win While Walking Away Stronger." In case you don't get it, read the subheadline. It says, by withholding soybean purchases and rare earth exports, China extracted relief from U.S. tariffs and delayed export controls without conceding much in return. On X, formerly Twitter, Cornell University law professor Dan Alpert, among the legions, calling it Taco Thursday. Taco Thursday, as in Trump always chickens out. Is it Taco Thursday? Tell us, Leonia, now.
What's for sure is the mood in DC is indeed that to be very cautious. First of all, we can't call this deal a game changer. There has been somewhat a sort of framework that has been agreed upon according to Scott Bessent, but it's very difficult to understand exactly what kind of clarity we'll get on export controls on both sides. We don't know how long it will hold. It's supposedly going to hold for 1 year according to the agreement, but the past months have shown us that that can absolutely be put into question. But what I want to also bring across is that Europe should be cautious. What this negotiation tells us also is that this has been done while the rare earth export controls and the tariffs affect Europe. We also should be cautious because we have not been consulted. We are not part of this discussion. And I noticed also in Air Force One that in the briefing that Trump gave on Air Force One that he said Ukraine was discussed a lot during the discussions between.
Yeah, so if the meeting only lasts 100 minutes.
But apparently Ukraine was also discussed, and there again, it feels a little bit like Europe had not been, or at least in the public knowledge, part of the discussions, and so cautious approach.
Elvire Fabry, let me just ask you about that, because I know where you are in Brussels, there was a Chinese delegation announced for this Thursday. Rare earths, the European Commission is trying to come up with a plan to try to wean itself off of Chinese rare earths, the way it's trying to wean itself off of Russian gas. You heard there, Leonie, talking about the impact that tariffs and the trade war between the US and China has on other countries. What's the impact on Europe?
The immediate impact is that China has rerouted some exports that were initially going to the US to other countries, notably Europe, notably Southeast Asia. 80% of the Chinese exports that were not able to access anymore the US markets had been already diversified throughout the world. So they demonstrate a huge agility and the diversification. So that's the first impact. And of course, this is happening in the framework of Chinese economy, which is confronted to a very low, decreasing domestic consumption, increasing overcapacities. So what we see arriving in the European market are very low-priced goods that are imposing a strong pressure on the European producers. Now, what the delegation, the purpose of the Chinese delegation in the EU is not only to continue the dialogue that was already engaged by the European Commission on to secure a sort of corridor for rare earth supply, and not only rare earth, but with critical mineral supply to the European market. And the Commission has been already very active on that front, because this is nothing new. I mean, the announcement that was made a couple of days ago about the export license for rare earth is something that was easily expected, notably because China has already imposed some licenses for the exports of gallium, germanium, graphites, and other critical minerals. So it's just the expansion of an already very well implemented and efficiently implemented strategy.
Let me bring in on this André Lozekog-Petri. This trade war between the US and China, how should Europe be steeling itself for it?
Well, if Europe continues as it does today, it's digging its own grave. I think we cannot over-exaggerate the catastrophic impact this rare earth topic has on Europe, and what Elvira just mentioned on the overcapacities. The fact that currently, when you look at in August, for the first time, the market share of Chinese automakers was higher than Audi and Renault together for the first time. I mean, you see it by your blank eyes on the streets of Paris, Munich, or Amsterdam, that the Chinese cars are like much more present. And the incapacity of Europe to realize that it's the only one still upholding WTO rules is making us a very naive continent.
So what, scrap the WTO?
Well, scrap the fact that we are the only ones that seems to be trying to play by the rule, while everybody is exporting its dumped and subsidized products and its overcapacities. I mean, when you look at overcapacities in solar panels, electric vehicles, electrolyzers for hydrogen, they are just 2 times, 3 times than the Chinese market needs. So overcapacity is built into the system, so you cannot play by traditional market rules when you have such a system happening. On rare earth, it's like a frog being boiled slowly, and unfortunately, when we realize that it's cooking time, it will be too late. The 9th of October decision by the Chinese that apparently Donald Trump was able to uphold for a year is going much further, because it's now requiring from Western importers of these rare earths that they disclose for what it will be used, what are the supply chain, what are the usage, what are even the specifications. So basically divulging all the industrial secrets. I mean, this is a terrible dilemma in which most industrial companies are faced in Europe. And what we see is discussions, strong speeches by the Commission, but a sense of urgency that comes 5 years, 10 years. I remind the first embargo of Chinese rare earths was towards Japan. That was 2010. So those who are surprised today just didn't do their homework. And last but not least, this 1 year grace period, I cannot help thinking that it gives Donald Trump time until the midterms. I don't think that there's a coincidence with that. So time for a certain level of relief for the U.S. economy. Will that? So I think we have a choice. Will that take away the sense of urgency in which especially Europe is? I mean, we only react under this extreme pressure, or will it, at the contrary, release a little bit the boiler, to take my frog image again, and Europe will go to other problems, and in a year we will be in the same situation again. I mean, the only way we can get out of it was with bold action, moonshots on refining, trying to find other methods, being much harder on tariffs, and being much harder on overcapacities and stopping the naivety. The problem is that the bloc is divided. Germany is finally waking up. You probably saw there was a cancellation last minute of the visit of the foreign minister. But Will that be enough? I have my doubt with the current technostructure that we see in the European, in Brussels or in the different member states' capitals. There's a lack of courage and of decisiveness in our capitals.
Yeah, Nancy Kian, do you agree with this notion that Andre is putting forth about, how do you handle China's overcapacity-driven model?
I would say that Europe has a short-run problem and a long-run problem. The short-run problem is just like what Andre said. There might be overcapacity. There is overcapacity, and given the trade issues with China, more and more of it will be diverted towards Europe, which is China's second largest trading partner. That's one issue. And the second issue is that China has shown with Japan and now with the US and the world that it is willing to flex its rare earth muscles and restrict supplies to the rest of the world. Right now, China contributes to, I think, 90% of rare earth refining. So that's like the short run problem. The long run problem, which I think is even more important and urgent for Europeans, and I think this is what was said earlier, is that if you look at what Trump is doing, when he talks about Russia, when he talks with China to Russia about Ukraine, he's essentially squeezing Europe out of the table, right? Trump's vision of the world is that there are three superpowers, America, Russia, and China. And so then the question is, where is Europe's role in that? And I think, the way for Europe to maintain its seat at the table or to enhance it, really it comes down to Russia and Ukraine. So I know many Europeans may not like what I'm about to say, but Europe needs to be more decisive and cohesive about its position in that war. How much support does it want to give? Does it want to take the leadership role or not? And this is going to come back to not only Europe's geopolitical prestige in the world, geoeconomic prestige in the world, it actually is going to affect rare earths. So Russia has the largest deposit of rare earth in Europe. Actually, Europe doesn't have rare earth deposits, right? So it's China has the most, and then Brazil and Vietnam together has as much as China does. In Europe, it's just Russia. Russia has about a fourth of what China does. So I think when the war ends, and it will end one way or the other someday, we don't know today, we don't know tomorrow, we hope sooner, we hope more peacefully, but it will end. And when it ends, access to Russians' rare earth will be on the top of the discussion list. In Europe, for its own sake, really wants to have a leading position in that discussion.
All right, and we can
Can
also...
I follow on, François?
Very briefly, go ahead, Elvire Fabry.
I would like also to say...
Yes, can I just follow on this point? Because I think that the support to Ukraine is unanimous in the EU, except if we put aside the position of Hungary. And the issue is not about the support and the cohesion that we have on Ukraine. It's about the capacity, military capacity. And the Europeans are investing much more in defense capacity, but it takes time. But we've been confronted only in a couple of months to the ambiguity of Donald Trump's position on Ukraine. And I think that's the point that I wanted to make. It's rather that the member states need to work much more in a coordinated way regarding rare earth. It's not only the European Commission that can lead that strategy. It's at the level of the member states, and André already underlined that point. It's about increasing investment in research and development, in processing, because it's not about accessing the mines of rare earth. We can find rare earth all throughout the world. That's not the point.
Yeah, but processing, Elvire Fabry, is dirty business. Are Europeans ready to process rare earth minerals on their home soil?
That's the whole point. We need to have more green technologies, but we need to invest quickly. And it's only by pulling at the European level those research capacity, investment capacity, that we can speed the development of cleaner technologies. And however, we will need to develop.
I was just going to ask André de Lizakog-Pretry very, very briefly, because we have to move on. You were just going to add one last point on this.
Yeah, no. I remind that in '98, in La Rochelle, which is a port city in France, 50% of the rare earths on the earth were refined. But we outsourced all this because it's using massive solvent. It always have a little bit of radioactive waste when you process lanthanides, and it consumes a lot of water and energy. But we have not put the energy, the moonshot, to revisit this process since 26 years. And I don't see any. So the whole simplification effort right now, which is stalled, especially at the European Parliament, the famous omnibus, which is about simplification of permits, it's not watering down the green commitment of the EU. It's just making our union much less bureaucratic. That is what is needed also on the research and development. And it's not happening. It's not happening. Unless that is happening, we are not going to refine or find vaccines or be better in space. So all these topics are actually linked. So it's a bit the future of the European Union. It's consistency, boldness, and simplification that we need.
All right,
If that is not
after
happening, we won't make it.
All right, and after, of course, the big power sit down between the U.S. and China that left other Asians out of the room, and as we've just been discussing, Europeans. There's also another precinct to be heard from, and that is the private sector. Perhaps as big a draw as Trump is the boss of chip maker NVIDIA. He was basically landing while Trump was leaving. NVIDIA, which this week became the planet's first $5 trillion company on paper. The country of France, by the way, has a GDP of just over $3 trillion. Taiwan-born American Jensen Huang sitting down with the CEOs of Samsung and Hyundai in Seoul. They tucked into fried chicken and beer at Kanbu Chicken. It's a local restaurant chain in the Gangnam district of the South Korean capital. And as you can see, the Silicon Valley tech titan, well, he drew a crowd.
For me, I became a fan of Jensen because I know that he's changing the game within the semiconductor industry, and just like the headways he's been able to make ever since starting NVIDIA, I think it's really inspirational.
And I'm very grateful and very honored that NVIDIA is the first company in history to reach $5 trillion. He was walking. The facts are that artificial intelligence is the most impactful technology of our time. It is the most impactful technology of all time. This is very likely going to be the largest technology industry the world's ever known. And so, is it possible for NVIDIA to be much larger than us today? I think the answer is absolutely so.
So your reaction there, Léonie Allard, the leather jacket wearing Jensen Huang addressing adoring fans.
Yes, I mean, there's something to be said about the role of the tech sector vis-à-vis the new US administration today, and the convergence that is quite unprecedented between the Silicon Valley and the Trump administration. If you think a few years back, there was an outcry at Google because the CEO had thought of drawing a contract with the US administration. And today we're in a completely reverse trend where the Silicon Valley and the administrations are working hand in hand in ways that are unprecedented. And so chips are central to this issue because they're central to AI, and the US, according to the AI czar of Trump, is in an existential race over AI.
Let's listen to Donald Trump. He promised chips for China, but he now insists that restrictions still apply for NVIDIA's next generation artificial intelligence Blackwell computer chips.
We did discuss chips. No, not the Blackwell. We're not talking about the Blackwell. That just came out yesterday. But a lot of chips, a lot of the chips. And that's good for us.
So these NVIDIA-made AI chips are very important, and they're going to be exported or not to China?
That's a good question. So they're indeed very important to China and to the world also. So, coming back to the tech convergence, Jensen Huang had a very important role in persuading the U.S. administration to lower the restrictions and to sell H20 chips, which are advanced chips that China needs to develop its AI. We have to remind ourselves that since 2018, the Americans have started imposing very strict restrictions on the semiconductor supply chain towards China. So this is something new. The Chinese have actually said, well, we don't really, I mean, the Chinese administration has suggested strongly to its private sector, I believe, not to use those chips, to say maybe we can reach autosufficiency fast enough, and we might be able to not have to depend on these H20 American chips that are American IP. At the same time, the bet of Jason Huang is to say, well, we would like to flood the market with our chips because then we can dominate the supply chain and we don't let China develop its own chips. So you have this kind of two strategies that are contradicting each other. And the question is, this new Blackwell chip that is designed by NVIDIA, if I understand correctly, to be sold for China within the limitations of what the administration has developed for export controls on chips, but also still a little more powerful. Whether that will be finally accepted by both parties is something where Trump apparently intends to be an arbiter of. So we'll have to see in the next month.
We just saw the live images there of Donald Trump returning to the United States. Nancy Khan, how does this movie end when it comes to NVIDIA's chips and China?
I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. NVIDIA's been walking a tightrope, right? So, Jensen Huang, first I have to say that as a Chinese American, we're very proud of Jensen Huang and all his achievements in making the first $5 trillion company. But, it's tricky for him. He's walking a tightrope. He's balancing geopolitical concerns that are hitting him from China, from the US, sometimes, like Leonie said, with contradictory policy demands, right? So it's not really clear what he needs to do at any given moment. And he would like to get along with China and the US. And the best thing for NVIDIA, and there's some sense that the best thing for NVIDIA is China and the US resolving its problems and business goes on as usual. But this is something that's entirely out. Well, I don't want to say entirely. It is the first $5 trillion company in the world. So we don't know what's in its power. But this is something that's usually out of the power, outside of the control of any given company. So I think time will tell.
And where does it leave his native Taiwan? Because after all, one of Taiwan's aces in the hole is the fact that it produces these chips that are so valued in the rest of the planet.
That's a tough question. Taiwan is caught between a rock and a hard place. It's managed to have a peaceful relationship with China, a cooperative, friendly one. And recently, it's been a little bit less cooperative, a little bit less friendly, but still, China is Taiwan's largest trading partner, and China is right there. China often talks about political and economic reunification. And so this is really tricky. While Taiwan, the best thing for Taiwan is to maintain the status quo, which is economic autonomy and de facto political autonomy. But that autonomy comes under threat whenever the US and China gets into a tittle-tattle. Taiwanese independence and America's support for Taiwan comes up. And I think this is a very difficult time for Taiwan. I won't lie.
André Lezecoq-Pietri, your thoughts on the role that Jensen Huang plays going forward?
He's both on a great place because it's basically when you talk AI and you make a fundraising of a company, half or 2/3 of it will go to buying NVIDIA chips. Then let's not forget a couple of things. One, he was recently caught. The Trump administration is not one monoblock. He was recently caught in a controversy with Steve Bannon, who basically accused him to be a traitor and even called for Jensen Huang to be arrested because Huang was calling for being much less tough on trainees and immigrants, because he was calling for more talent to come to the US. That's point number one. Point number two, DeepSeek, which is one of the challenger of the big large language model companies in the US, has been trained on not the last generation of chips, but on all the H800 chips. So that showed that actually the embargo on the latest chip did not work, because maybe the future of AI will not be even more energy, even more training inference. And last but not least, let's not forget the very hard experience that the US learned from banning 5G technology or operating systems. Well, actually, Huawei and others have been able to actually recreate in just a couple of years what people thought impossible, to recreate operating systems and 5G technology that would be different and separated from the Western one. Yes, NVIDIA is still very valuable for China, but here too, maybe this is the reason for the 1-year moratorium, is the Chinese are developing their own homegrown technology, and that works particularly well under constraint. I remind that they are the only ones with Taiwan to have gone to semiconductors under 10 nanometers. Apparently, they now master 7 nanometers, that the US and Europe are not mastering at all. So I would say it's a very important advantage. NVIDIA is fully on the AI curve. Some people call it even a bubble. But I think China has, and we heard that from the latest plenum that just finished in Beijing, clearly the objective of being independent also on chips. And that will be a very, very bad day for Taiwan too.
Quick final question, Léonie Allard. What does it say about the times we live in that we have these tech titans? First it was Elon Musk. Now it's Jensen Huang, that basically, well, we have as much power as many countries, and have the kind of following that rock stars have.
Yeah, I mean, I see that also in relation maybe to the evolution of international relations these days.
Are international relations being privatized?
I mean, I wouldn't say that, but what's for sure is you have a world order that's becoming more and more multipolar, and on top of that, you have countries, the U.S. in lead, but also China, Taiwan, that are conducting geopolitics on the basis of is the tech chip supply chain, the semiconductor supply chain, going to be profitable for me? Am I going to hold the choke points of this new, instead of maritime, instead, they're still important, but on top of maritime choke points, are there some new technological choke points that are emerging and that countries are vying for control over? And that means we may indeed have more sometimes collusion, cooperation with the private sector in the future.
The digital space competing with geographical locations. We're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you so much, Léonie Allard, for being with us. I want to thank Nancy Kiang for being with us from Chicago, as well as Elvire Fabry from Brussels, André Lezecoq-Petry from Ajaccio in Corsica. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.